16 of the most chaotic, unpredictable, and unforgettable moments in Tonight Show history revealed sides of Johnny Carson that audiences rarely saw. For 3 decades, Carson brought a sense of cool control to late-night television, presenting himself as the unshakable host who could glide through any awkward moment with effortless wit. But behind that polished exterior were nights when even he was caught completely off guard. Producers who worked with him often said that Johnny prided himself on being prepared for anything. Yet there were times when live television simply refused to cooperate. These were the moments when the normally composed Carson cracked, broke format, lost his composure, or was swept up in the unexpected chaos unfolding before him. Number 8 in particular shocked viewers and generated an avalanche of mail, proving that even the most professional host could still surprise his audience. But before we get to that, we begin with the tomahawk demonstration that produced one of the most perfect, unplanned comedic disasters ever broadcast. 1. Ed Ames' tomahawk disaster. Started out as a routine demonstration. Ames, who played Mingo on Daniel Boone, appeared on The Tonight Show in 1965 to demonstrate to viewers how to throw a tomahawk. He used a wooden cowboy silhouette as his target. Ames threw the tomahawk expertly, but the blade landed right in the figure's crotch. The audience erupted into laughter, but it was Carson's uncontrollable breakdown that made this moment a part of television history. He doubled over, unable to speak, with tears running down his face as he struggled to compose himself. It wasn't until almost 3 minutes later that he could utter the now famous punchline, "I didn't even know you were Jewish." For once, it seemed Carson's smooth on-air persona was gone, and he was genuinely, helplessly laughing. The clip became one of The Tonight Show's most replayed highlights, and a defining example of Carson's ability to turn unexpected mishaps into comedic perfection. 2. Don Rickles breaking Carson's beloved wooden cigarette box resulted in one of the most spontaneous cross-studio confrontations in late-night history. Rickles accidentally broke the box guest hosting in 1973 and joked nervously about Carson's reaction. When Johnny returned the next night, he mentioned the damage, but let the audience wonder how he'd get even. Months later, during a commercial break, he learned Rickles was filming his sitcom on a nearby soundstage. Without any planning, Carson grabbed his crew, stormed into the live taping of CPO Sharkey, and confronted Rickles in front of a stunned studio audience. Rickles was mid-scene, fully in costume, when Carson demanded an explanation for the broken box. The exchange revealed not just their comedic chemistry, but their genuine affection. The moment became a Tonight Show classic, remembered as a time when Carson abandoned all structure and embraced pure, unscripted fun. 3. Bette Midler making Carson cry was one of the most emotional moments of his entire 30-year career. As the show's end neared its conclusion in 1992, things took on an increasingly sentimental air. Midler, following a lively comedic interview, shocked Carson by singing "One for My Baby" and "One More for the Road" directly to him. The studio fell silent as the camera captured Carson's eyes welling up with tears. Known for his emotional distance and carefully controlled demeanor, Carson rarely let such vulnerability slip through. But on this night, he didn't try to hide it. He simply let the moment wash over him. When Midler finished, he kissed her hand and quietly said, "I can't top that." The simple, sincere gesture marked one of the most heartfelt goodbyes in television history. 4. The night a Capuchin monkey climbed onto Carson's head became one of the most requested animal segment clips in the show's archive. Animal handler Joanne Steele brought the tiny monkey in for what was supposed to be a routine demonstration. Instead, without warning, the monkey leapt onto Carson's immaculately styled hair and clung there like it had found its own personal tree. Carson sat perfectly still, giving the camera a resigned, deadpan look as the monkey tugged, climbed, and destroyed the hair he guarded so carefully. When the monkey finally returned to its handler, Carson addressed the audience with dry understatement. "And this, ladies and gentlemen, is why I prefer cats." The moment showcased his gift for staying calm, finding humor in chaos, and turning personal embarrassment into effortless comedy. 5. Steve Martin's The Absurd Magic routine offered Carson a rare chance to laugh like an ordinary audience member. By 1980, Martin had carved out a reputation for anti-comedy, performances that were intentionally strange and unpredictable. He told Carson he would perform a magic act, then launched into the famously bizarre Great Fly-Dini routine, producing eggs, salt shakers, a ringing telephone, and even a tiny waving hand from his fly. At first, Carson tried to maintain the straight man role. But as Martin's absurdity escalated, Johnny's composure cracked. By the end, he was bent over, barely able to breathe from laughing. For a host who had seen thousands of comedians, it was rare to be genuinely surprised. Martin's performance reminded Carson and the audience what it felt like to encounter something completely original and joyfully ridiculous. 6. Robin Williams goes rogue. When Robin Williams came onto The Tonight Show, the normal construct of late-night television immediately broke down into utter, unbridled mayhem. Williams, with his manic energy and quicksilver improvisation, simply couldn't operate within Carson's meticulously controlled interview format. A Tonight Show writer who witnessed several of Williams' appearances once recalled that Johnny told him trying to handle Robin was like trying to catch lightning in a bottle while it's already running away. Most guests followed Johnny's lead. Robin was one of a rare few who made Johnny follow his. One of the most memorable appearances came in the early 1980s. Williams arrived to promote a film, but within seconds he had launched into a barrage of rapid-fire impressions, jumped out of his chair to perform a physical bit, and even transformed Carson's desk into an impromptu stage. The control room panicked, unsure of whether to cut to commercial or let the chaos play out. But Carson always waved them off. He knew that with Robin, the only option was to let go and enjoy the ride. What made these moments unforgettable was watching Carson, normally the master of control, willingly cede the reins. Instead of leaning forward in his chair to try to steer the show back on track, he leaned back often, wiping away tears of laughter and mostly happy to just watch Williams work. According to one longtime producer, Carson loved that Robin kept him on his toes. After doing thousands of interviews with predictable rhythms, Robin's unpredictability was refreshing. Carson began preparing the audience before Williams came out, almost warning them that the usual format no longer applied. 7. Don Rickles roasts Frank Sinatra. When Frank Sinatra appeared on The Tonight Show in 1976, he carried with him the aura of a man few dare tease. The man's temper, influence, and image made comics tread gingerly. Don Rickles was not one of those comics. Seated beside Sinatra on Carson's couch, Rickles launched into a fearless roast, treating the chairman of the board as casually as any other target. The moment he gestured toward Sinatra and declared he's overrated, the tension in the studio became almost palpable. But the camera did capture the look on Carson's face, one that mixed nervous amusement with concern. He knew Sinatra didn't always take kindly to jokes at his own expense. Still, Rickles plunged forward, clutching Sinatra's knee and saying, "Frank, I'm only kidding. You know I love you. Can I get a ride home?" Much to the relief of everyone, Sinatra let out a burst of authentic laughter. It was an unusually tender moment in the life of a man so fiercely guarding his public persona. Carson later admitted how much guts it took for Rickles to confront Sinatra like that. The moment became memorable not only for the comedy, but for what it represented, a brief breakdown of celebrity hierarchy, where even the most revered star could be roasted on live television. It perfectly captured the kind of magic Carson prized, spontaneous, unpredictable, and undeniably human. 8. Dolly Parton and the infamous comment. By the time Dolly Parton made her appearance on The Tonight Show in 1977, she had already become famous for her musical brilliance, as well as her curvy figure, something she herself often joked about. During the interview, she and Carson took turns in some of the playful banter that viewers loved. But then Carson made a remark that instantly became one of the most talked about moments in the show's history. Looking at her low-cut outfit, he said, "I'd give a year of my life to peek under that blouse." The audience tittered and gasped. Parton laughed it off with aplomb, but the moment was already television history. Those in the control room held their collective breath. The comment may have fallen within acceptable boundaries of the era, yet it was unusually blunt for Carson, who usually maintained a gentlemanly restraint. Viewer mail poured in, some praising his honesty, others condemning the remark as inappropriate. Carson never publicly apologized for the incident, although he privately conceded in later years that he had crossed a line. Parton herself never took offense, and even called it a compliment. The incident stands today as an example of the cultural tightrope being walked at the time and era when television was still testing the boundaries between humor, candor, and respect. The incident remains one of Carson's most referenced moments, a reflection of the times and how public standards were changing. 9. Bob Hope bombs, and Carson is over it. Bob Hope was once one of America's comedy giants, but by the 1980s his appearances on The Tonight Show had become uncomfortable. No longer sharp or connected to the audience, Hope relied on note cards, outdated jokes, and familiar material that no longer landed. A Tonight Show writer from the period said Carson dreaded Hope's appearances. In private, Johnny admitted that Hope no longer listened to the room, he simply talked. The most painful appearance came in the mid-1980s. Hope delivered stale political jokes and golf one-liners, as the audience reacted politely but without enthusiasm. Carson maintained his professional facade, but betrayed the reality with his tightening smile and nervous glances at Ed McMahon. It was one of those moments that reflect the cruel realities of comedy. What works brilliantly in one era can fall flat in another. Producers later said that watching Hope struggle reminded Carson of his own place in show business. He knew how tenuous comedic relevance could be. Still, despite his private frustrations, he always treated Hope with public respect. It was a difficult but telling moment, watching one legend in decline and another doing his best to honor him. 10. Jimmy Stewart's poem leaves Carson speechless. Jimmy Stewart was an adored and frequent guest, whose gentle presence invariably charmed audiences. In 1981, he appeared and said that he had written a poem for his dog, Bo, who had just died. Carson invited him to read it, probably expecting something light. Instead, Stewart gave a poignant, deeply emotional tribute to a loyal friend and years of companionship. As Stewart's voice cracked and the poem reached its final lines, the camera turned to Carson. For one of the rare times in his career, he was visibly moved, eyes glistening, unable to speak right away. Those in the control room said it wasn't an act. It was pure, unfiltered emotion from a man who usually kept such feelings private. Carson didn't move right into a joke or cut to commercial. The moment was allowed to breathe, a signal to the audience that even on late-night television, sincerity, even sadness, was acceptable. That poem and Carson's response became among the most treasured moments of the entire Tonight Show run, not for its humor, but for the honest human connection it created between two icons and the millions watching at home. 11. Joan Embry's animal segments were always unpredictable, but one appearance in the late 1970s became an instant classic. She brought several animals from the San Diego Zoo that day, including a large Burmese python. As she was explaining various facts about the snake, it suddenly started slithering off the desk and making its way quickly toward Carson. Johnny reacted with pure instinct. He leapt from his chair, backing away at a rather impressive speed, and displaying a look of genuine fear that sent the audience into laughter. Staff members later confirmed nothing about his response was rehearsed. Carson always attempted to be a good sport with animals, but when that python made its move, every bit of composure vanished on live television. Once Embry and her assistants regained control of a snake, Carson straightened his tie, sat back down, and delivered a perfectly timed joke. "Somebody better check my pants." The moment worked because it revealed Johnny's humanity. He wasn't the untouchable king of late night in that instant. He was just a guy who absolutely did not want a giant snake crawling toward him. Producers frequently pointed to this moment as a prime example of why audiences adored Carson. His willingness to put himself in uncomfortable situations often created the most memorable clips, and the python incident became one of the most requested animal segments in Tonight Show history. 12. George Carlin's 1983 appearance. Carlin demonstrated his trademark ability to push the envelope while remaining technically within the rules. He did an easygoing monologue full of everyday observations, and within it, he slipped in a subtle jab at network censorship. Clever enough to get past NBC's standards department, sharp-eared viewers, and Carson himself caught it immediately. Johnny reacted with a knowing smile and a quick glance toward the camera, signaling that he knew exactly what Carlin had done and had no intention of stopping the moment. Writers who worked on the show would later remember how Carson admired that Carlin could find a way around restrictions without technically violating them. Carson was not a boundary pusher, but he often bridled at heavy network interference and appreciated those comedians who could find a way around those boundaries imaginatively. NBC executives were less amused, taking calls asking how the joke had made it onto the air. Offstage, Carson came to Carlin's defense, suggesting that if the network didn't catch the subversive line in advance, then Carlin won. For viewers, the moment became one of those rare, brilliant instances when television commented smartly on its own censorship, a private joke between Carson and Carlin that happened in plain sight. 13. Dean Martin on The Tonight Show in the 1970s. He was at full strength with this legendary drunk persona. He slurred words, missed his chair, and delivered punchlines with exaggerated care while performing, as though he was always on the edge of losing control. Audiences loved it, believing they were witnessing the real Dean Martin in all his boozy charm. Later, a director claimed that Martin really laid into the persona that night, and the crowd responded with roaring laughter. Carson played along to perfection, serving as Martin's straight man and providing him with setups that Dean used to take the act to another level. Insiders said that while Martin liked his drink, most of his on-air drunkenness was an act he'd refined over many years. The genius was in how the viewers never knew where the act stopped and reality started. The highlight was when Martin tried to tell a story about a round of golf, lost his thought, shrugged, and muttered, "Ah, who cares? It wasn't that funny anyway." The audience exploded. Although some critics have suggested since that the segment trivialized drinking, it remains one of those moments that attest to electric chemistry between Carson and Martin, both men playing to their respective personas that the public adored. 14. One of the most surprising moments of Carson's show came in the early 1980s when his nightly monologue was unexpectedly interrupted. As Carson began telling jokes, guest star Don Rickles, set to appear later in the show, began loudly heckling him from backstage. The audience at first was confused until Rickles' unmistakable voice made it clear what was happening. Mid-joke, Carson froze, looked toward the curtain, and promptly broke completely from his polished monologue. "Don, get out here," called out Carson, and Rickles was on stage, far earlier than he was supposed to be. A stage manager later confirmed that none of this was planned. Rickles was supposed to wait quietly until his segment. Instead, he had created delightful chaos. Rather than being irritated, Carson joined the spontaneity, and the two launched into an improv exchange more entertaining than the written jokes Carson had planned. Producers would later say that this was the moment that captured the brilliance of Carson, who instinctively knew when the script was unimportant and when something organic was occurring that was far more entertaining. Rickles' unpredictability invigorated him, and their interactions became the stuff of legend because neither man was fully predictable when they shared the stage. It was just another example of how the show worked when Carson trusted his instincts and allowed real, unscripted magic to take center stage by dispensing with the monologue and delving into the unexpected. 15. Sammy Davis Jr. was considered to be one of the most versatile performers in the history of entertainment, and he proved just why during one unforgettable appearance on Tonight in the 1970s. What began as a casual conversation about fellow entertainers suddenly turned into a dazzling display of his mimicry skills. Without warning, Davis launched into a rapid sequence of impressions, morphing seamlessly into Frank Sinatra, Jerry Lewis, and Jimmy Stewart. He pegged not only their voices, but their physical mannerisms with uncanny accuracy, switching personalities with no hesitation. According to a camera operator who was there, Carson was laughing so hard he was clutching his stomach, completely taken over by genuine, uncontrollable laughter. What made the moment so remarkable was its spontaneity. Unlike rehearsed segments, this burst of impressions came directly out of the conversation, showing how deeply Davis had absorbed the mannerisms of the people he performed with and admired. Producers later said that Davis didn't need any preparation since he'd worked side by side with these entertainers for decades, studying them up close until their voices and gestures became second nature. Carson's reaction reflected his admiration, but also his understanding as a former performer. He knew how difficult it was to capture another entertainer's essence precisely in such rapid succession. One time, writers said Carson described Sammy as the most complete entertainer he ever knew. The Impression Blitz stays one of the most celebrated examples of Davis's extraordinary versatility, a brief but brilliant display of why he was considered one of show business's best all-around talents. 16. Arnold Schwarzenegger. By the mid-1980s, Arnold Schwarzenegger had established himself as a major action star, and Tonight Show appearances generally followed a familiar promotional pattern. But during one memorable visit, he decided to surprise Carson and the audience with an unexpected joke. When Carson asked his first question, Schwarzenegger responded with a long, seemingly serious answer spoken entirely in German. Carson immediately looked confused, as he had no idea Arnold was going to do this. A producer later confirmed that Johnny was completely blindsided and glanced toward the control room as if asking what was going on. Rather than kill the bit, Carson leaned into the absurdity. He nodded thoughtfully, pretending to understand, and even occasionally chimed in with made-up words that sounded vaguely German, which sent the audience into laughter. Schwarzenegger kept the gag running for several minutes before finally breaking into a grin and switching back to English. He said afterward he'd always wondered how Carson would react if he unexpectedly broke into German on air. The magic of the moment came because Carson played along rather than trying to regain control or expressing annoyance. Directors who worked on the show said many hosts would have been irritated at being caught off guard, but Carson immediately knew the comedic potential and became a full partner in the prank. The exchange showed an underrated sense of humor on Schwarzenegger's part and a talent on Carson's part for creating unforgettable television out of an unpredictable moment. As Carson used to say, the best moments on The Tonight Show were always ones that nobody could plan, and this was a perfect example. A guest going off script, and Johnny trusting his instincts enough to follow the bit wherever it led.